An ex-boyfriend who stalked and terrorized Hollywood sex therapist Amie Harwick is found guilty of throwing her to her death from the balcony of her home.
On the surface, Amie Nicole Harwick's story was that of a young woman who had built herself from scratch, a self-made life filled with intellect, compassion, and ambition. But to understand the tragedy that struck in February 2020, one must first go back to the beginning, to the child and teenager who dreamed of more than what her small-town beginnings offered. Amie was born on May 20th, 1981, in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, a working-class town near Scranton. Dunmore was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where steel mills and coal country defined much of the local character, and where most residents grew up with a sense of tradition and rootedness. For Amie, however, there was always a pull towards something larger, something beyond the confines of her hometown. As a child, Amie was curious, sensitive, and artistic. She loved reading, often retreating into books to explore worlds bigger than her own. She was also deeply empathetic. Teachers remembered her as the kind of student who not only excelled academically, but who noticed when others were struggling. She had an innate ability to listen, to comfort, and to see through the facades her peers sometimes put up, but life in her early years was not without difficulty. Amie's family experienced challenges, and as she grew older, she sometimes felt the pull of independence earlier than most. Friends remembered her as fiercely determined, with a maturity that set her apart. While other teenagers worried about popularity or parties, Amie was thinking about the future, about how to create a life for herself that was meaningful. In high school, she leaned into the arts. She loved painting, writing, and performing, and she often expressed herself through creativity. At the same time, she was drawn towards psychology and human behavior. Why did people act the way they did? Why did relationships succeed or fail? Why did some people thrive under adversity while others collapsed? These were the questions that lingered in her mind even as a teenager. Her friends often confided in her, sensing that she was someone who wouldn't judge. She became the unofficial therapist of her peer group, listening for hours, giving advice, and holding secrets with trust. She didn't yet know that this skill would become her career, but the seeds of her future were already present. After graduating high school in the late 1990s, Amie faced a crossroads. She wanted to leave Pennsylvania, to immerse herself in a place where she could pursue bigger ambitions. That pull led her to California, a state synonymous with reinvention, creativity, and possibility. She enrolled at California Polytechnic State University, Cal Poly Pomona, pursuing her undergraduate degree in psychology. College was transformative. For the first time, Amie was in an environment that nurtured her intellectual curiosity. She threw herself into her studies, fascinated by courses in human development, behavioral science, and clinical psychology. She was particularly drawn to how relationships shape people, the ways love, trauma, and intimacy can leave lasting imprints on the mind. But Amie was not all academics. She had a vibrant personality, balancing her studies with social life. Friends remembered her as witty, stylish, and adventurous. She loved music, nightlife, and the creative energy of California. She wasn't afraid to stand out, often experimenting with fashion and expressing herself boldly. By the time she graduated with her bachelor's degree in psychology, Amie knew she had found her calling. But she also understood that to make an impact in her chosen field, she needed to go further. She enrolled in graduate school at Pepperdine University, one of Southern California's most prestigious programs for psychology and counseling. At Pepperdine, Amie thrived. She pursued a Master of Arts in Clinical Psychology, specializing in marriage and family therapy, MFD. Her focus reflected her lifelong interest, understanding love, intimacy, sexuality, and trauma. She studied under professors who challenged her, interned at clinics where she met clients from all walks of life, and began to see how theory translated into real healing. The work was demanding. Graduate school required long nights of reading dense clinical texts, writing research papers, and working practicum hours with clients. But Amie poured herself into it. She had found her purpose, helping others navigate the complexities of love and pain. Outside of academics, Amie's personality continued to shine. She was known for her sense of humor and her ability to balance seriousness with lightness. Even when studying subjects like abuse, trauma, or grief, She brought compassion and optimism. She believed that people could change, that healing was possible, and that relationships could be repaired. Amie graduated with her master's degree in 2011, officially becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist. For her, this was not just a professional milestone, but the realization of a vision she had carried since her youth. The ability to help people transform their lives. In the years that followed, she began to build her career in Los Angeles. She worked with clients dealing with trauma, depression, anxiety, and relationship struggles. Her approach was modern and refreshing. She wasn't the type of therapist who sat silently with a notepad. She engaged actively, spoke candidly, and met her clients with both compassion and clarity. Her expertise quickly became recognized. She began writing articles, appearing on panels, and speaking publicly about issues of sexuality, intimacy, and mental health. She published a book, The New Sex Bible for Women, 2014, which tackled topics of female sexuality in an accessible, empowering way. Amie's blend of academic credibility and approachable style set her apart. But beyond her career, Amie was a woman of many dimensions. She loved music and the arts, attending concerts and supporting creative communities in Los Angeles. She was fashionable, known for her striking looks and personal style. She valued her friendships deeply, often hosting gatherings and nurturing those around her. She adored her cats, which became central figures in her home life. Those who knew her, Amie seemed unstoppable. She was intelligent, successful, charismatic, and compassionate, a woman who had built a life for herself out of grit and vision. But beneath the glamour of Los Angeles and the acclaim of her career, there were shadows. Amie, like many women, had encountered toxic relationships. One of those relationships, with a man named Gareth Pursehouse, would haunt her for years, long after she had broken it off. In 2011, the same year she graduated from Pepperdine, Amie first crossed paths with Gareth. At the time, she had no idea that the relationship would become abusive, that she would later need restraining orders, and that nearly a decade later, he would return to shatter the life she had so carefully built. For now, though, in the early 2010s, Amie was at the peak of her rise, a young woman whose intelligence, creativity, and determination made her a force in her field. Her tragedy was still years away. When Amie Harwick graduated from Pepperdine with her master's degree in clinical psychology in 2011, she stepped into Los Angeles with a sense of confidence and momentum. The city was sprawling and chaotic, full of people chasing dreams in film, music, technology, and art. But Amie was carving a different kind of path, not as an actress or singer, but as someone who could help others understand themselves and their relationships. Los Angeles, with its glamour and darkness, needed therapists like Amie. Beneath the glittering lights of Hollywood, countless people were struggling with addiction, trauma, loneliness, and the pressures of fame and success. Amie offered a safe space for them. Her practice quickly attracted clients not only from the general public, but also from the creative industries. She was young, approachable, and modern, qualities that appealed to a city hungry for authenticity. Her style set her apart from older, more traditional therapists. Amie dressed fashionably, with her long dark hair, striking features, and elegant sense of presentation. She wasn't interested in sitting silently behind a clipboard. She talked openly, laughed with clients, and made therapy feel accessible rather than clinical. She focused on issues of sexuality, intimacy, trauma, and empowerment, topics that resonated deeply with women, men, and couples navigating the complexity of relationships in the modern world. By 2014, Amie had authored her first book, The New Sex Bible for Women. The book was both educational and liberating, aiming to empower women to embrace their sexuality without shame. It was bold and unapologetic, fitting for Amie's personality. Her willingness to speak openly about topics that many still considered taboo earned her a reputation as a progressive voice in the field of sex therapy. She began appearing in media, interviews, podcasts, panels, and online articles. Journalists valued her ability to distill complex psychological ideas into clear, relatable language. She wasn't afraid to confront issues like abuse, coercion, sexual dysfunction, and gender dynamics. At a time when conversations about sexuality were evolving, Amie stood at the forefront, combining academic expertise with compassion and relatability. Her visibility grew. She built a following on social media, where she shared articles, advice, and glimpses of her life. She connected with other professionals, writers, and influencers. She became part of Hollywood's social circles, attending parties, fundraisers, and art events. Her beauty and charisma made her stand out. But it was her intellect and kindness that made her unforgettable. Through her work, Amie also became a strong advocate for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. She knew from her practice and from her own life how devastating abusive relationships could be. She encouraged clients to reclaim their voices, to set boundaries, and to heal from trauma. In interviews, she spoke about breaking cycles of abuse and empowering women to seek freedom and safety. In 2017, Amie's name reached an even wider audience when she began dating Drew Carey, the comedian and host of The Price is Right. Carey, nearly 2 decades older than Amie, was charmed by her intelligence and independence. To outsiders, the pairing seemed unlikely. A television star known for comedy and a serious therapist immersed in psychology. But those close to them said the relationship was real and affectionate. Drew admired Amie's ambition and respected her career. He appreciated that she wasn't drawn to him for fame or money, but for who he was as a person. Amie, for her part, found Drew supportive and kind. Their romance blossomed, and in early 2018, the two became engaged. Carey publicly expressed his excitement, telling reporters that he felt lucky to have found someone as extraordinary as Amie. For a time, it looked like Amie's life was falling into place perfectly. She had a thriving career, a growing media presence, and a partner who adored her. Friends recalled that she seemed genuinely happy, hopeful about the future. Her engagement to Carey brought her more media attention, but she continued to focus on her practice, keeping her professional identity at the center of her life. Yet by the end of 2018, the engagement had quietly ended. Neither Amie nor Drew spoke publicly about the reasons, though friends suggested it was amicable. They cared for each other, but realized their paths diverged. Drew later described Amie as a wonderful person and spoke of her with respect even after they split. For Amie, the end of the engagement was not a derailment, but a redirection. She continued her work with renewed focus. She expanded her practice, took on new clients, and kept writing and speaking. She was resilient, unwilling to let personal setbacks overshadow her mission. By 2019, Amie Harwick had established herself as one of Los Angeles's most respected and visible therapists in her field. She was recognized not only for her professional skills, but for her courage in discussing difficult topics. She was glamorous and intellectual, compassionate and bold. But in the shadows of her success, danger lingered. Years earlier, she had been in a relationship with a man named Gareth Pursehouse. That relationship had been toxic, marked by control and abuse. Amie had escaped, even obtained restraining orders against him. She had moved on, built her life, and left him behind, or so she thought. As she celebrated her career and her freedom, Gareth reemerged. In January 2020, Amie unexpectedly ran into him at an industry event. The encounter unsettled her deeply. She confided to friends that his presence reignited old fears. She knew he was still out there, and that he hadn't forgotten her. Before she was a rising voice in Los Angeles, before the book deals and speaking engagements, Amie Harwick met Gareth Pursehouse. Their paths first crossed around 2008 in the overlapping world of Los Angeles creatives. Gareth was a software engineer, photographer, and aspiring comedian. He had a quirky, eccentric personality, one that initially seemed exciting. To someone as open and empathetic as Amie, Gareth's intensity could have seemed intriguing at first. They began dating, but almost immediately, troubling dynamics emerged. Gareth's charm masked a darker side: jealousy, volatility, and a need for control. Amie, who was both compassionate and conflict-averse, tried to manage the relationship, believing she could help him or calm him. But as time went on, Gareth's behavior escalated into emotional abuse and, according to court documents, physical violence. By 2011, Amie realized she needed to escape. In June of that year, she filed for a restraining order, citing abuse. In her court declaration, she described how Gareth had slammed her head into the ground, covered her mouth to silence her screams, and left her fearful for her safety. She wrote that he had stalked her, harassed her with messages, and refused to accept the end of their relationship. The court granted her a temporary restraining order, which was later extended. For Amie, the legal paperwork was both a shield and a statement. She would not allow Gareth to control her life. Yet, even with the restraining order, the fear lingered. Those who have lived through abusive relationships know that the threat doesn't vanish with a judge's signature. Amie worked hard to rebuild her life after Gareth. She poured herself into her career, friendships, and personal growth. She spoke openly about abuse in her work, counseling clients who had endured similar experiences. Her advocacy wasn't abstract, it was born of lived experience. She encouraged others to reclaim their power because she had fought to reclaim hers. For years, Gareth remained in the background, a figure she avoided but never fully forgot. He occasionally resurfaced online, posting cryptic messages or reaching out in ways that unsettled her. Amie tried to ignore him, to move forward, to live as if he no longer existed. She dated other people, built her career, and told herself she was free, but trauma has a way of echoing. Even as she succeeded, there were moments when the thought of Gareth returned like a shadow. She kept her guard up, careful about her safety, careful about where she went. Then, in January 2020, nearly a decade after their breakup, Amie unexpectedly ran into Gareth at a public event in Los Angeles. It was a night meant to celebrate the industry, filled with acquaintances and colleagues. Amie arrived radiant, confident, her career thriving. And then, suddenly, there he was, Gareth Pursehouse, standing across the room. Witnesses later said that Gareth's reaction was intense. He confronted her, angry, bitter, his emotions spilling out in ways that startled those around them. For Amie, it was like a nightmare resurfacing in daylight. She kept her composure, but afterward, she confided in friends that the encounter had shaken her. The old fear returned. She worried aloud that Gareth might still be obsessed with her, that he hadn't let go of the anger from years past. Friends urged her to be cautious. She considered filing another restraining order. In conversations, she admitted she was scared, not in a vague sense, but with the sharp intuition of someone who had seen what Gareth was capable of. In the weeks that followed, Amie tried to carry on with life. She continued to see clients, attend events, and enjoy time with friends. Outwardly, she was the same Amie, glamorous, intelligent, full of compassion. But those close to her noticed moments of unease. She double-checked her locks. She was cautious about going out alone. The sense of safety she had built for nearly a decade had been fractured. On February 14, 2020, Valentine's Day, Amie spent time with friends, celebrating life and love in her own way. She laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed herself. But beneath the laughter, the shadow of Gareth lingered. She had told people she feared what he might do. She hoped she was wrong. That night, she returned to her home in the Hollywood Hills, a beautiful multi-level house with sweeping views of Los Angeles. It was her sanctuary, a place where she had felt safe. But in the early hours of February 15th, that sanctuary would be shattered. Gareth Pursehouse, still consumed by bitterness and obsession, had found his way back into her life. And this time, he wouldn't let her go. The night of February 14th, 2020 unfolded like so many others in Los Angeles. Across the city, couples celebrated Valentine's Day with dinners, drinks, and flowers. In the Hollywood Hills, Amie Harwick returned to her home after an evening spent with friends. She was vibrant, happy, laughing only hours earlier. Despite the unease stirred by her run-in with Gareth weeks before, she refused to let fear rule her life. Her home on Mound Street was perched above the city, a modern multi-level residence with balconies that opened to the sparkling lights of Los Angeles. Inside, it was filled with warmth, her books, art, her beloved cats, the marks of a woman who had built a sanctuary. But as the city settled into the early hours of February 15th, Gareth Pursehouse was nearby. Court documents later revealed he had been lying in wait, his obsession rekindled by their January encounter. For nearly a decade, Gareth had stewed in bitterness. Now, he acted on it at approximately 1 a.m. Amie's roommate heard a commotion, the sound of struggle, cries, and movement. Alarmed, he retreated to safety and called 911, reporting that Amie was being attacked. When police arrived minutes later, They discovered a horrific scene that Amie's body lay in the courtyard below her balcony. Investigators determined she had been strangled in the struggle and then thrown, or forced, from the third-story balcony. She had sustained fatal injuries from the fall. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. But despite their efforts, Amie Harwick, 38 years old, was pronounced dead. Detectives pieced together the evidence quickly. Forced entry marks were found, and Amie's injuries were consistent with a violent assault. Most damning were the signs pointing to Gareth Pursehouse. His DNA was later recovered at the scene, and surveillance footage placed him near the house. Within hours, police obtained a warrant that on February 15, 2020, Gareth Pursehouse was arrested outside his home in Playa del Rey. He was charged with murder and first-degree residential burglary. For those who knew Amie, the name was no surprise. She had warned friends about him. She had lived with the fear of his obsession for years. And now, he had taken her life. The news of Amie's death rippled across Los Angeles and beyond. For the therapy community, it was the loss of a respected colleague and advocate. For her friends, it was unthinkable, the silencing of a vibrant, compassionate soul. For her family, it was devastation. And for Drew Carey, her former fiancé, it was heartbreaking. Carey released a statement, calling Amie a positive force in the world, a tireless champion for women, and someone who wanted to help people. On his show The Price is Right, he took time to grieve, dedicating episodes to her memory. His pain was palpable. Though they had ended their engagement, his affection and respect for Amie had never diminished. Public outrage followed. Amie's death became a rallying cry about domestic violence, stalking, and the failures of the system. Advocates pointed out that Amie had taken all the steps she could, restraining orders, therapy, moving forward, yet Gareth still had access to her. California lawmakers faced renewed pressure to strengthen protections for victims of intimate partner violence and stalking. In the months that followed, vigils were held in Amie's honor. Colleagues remembered her not just for her tragic end, but for her life's work, empowering women, supporting survivors, and destigmatizing conversations about sexuality and mental health. Her family established funds in her name, supporting causes close to her heart. Friends flooded social media with tributes, posting photos of Amie smiling, laughing, speaking on panels, holding her cats, reminders that she was more than the manner of her death. As of 2023, Gareth Pursehouse awaited trial, facing the possibility of life in prison. For Amie's loved ones, justice was slow, but their resolve was unwavering. They spoke often about keeping her legacy alive, ensuring that her voice, silenced too soon, continued to help others. Amie Harwick was 38 years old. She was a therapist, a writer, an advocate, a daughter, a friend. She had built a life defined by compassion, resilience, and brilliance. And though her life ended violently on a Valentine's night, her story endures as a reminder of both the dangers of obsession and the power of empathy. Her legacy is not just in how she died, but in how she lived, fearless, compassionate, and dedicated to helping others heal.